Good morning and welcome. Let's come in and turn to Romans chapter 11. Romans chapter 11. We're finishing the section of 3 chapters where Paul is answering the questions about Israel. He brings it to a close with chapter 11 by going back to the Old Testament and reminded the listeners of that day, and us, of course, of the reality of God understanding the future, of God predicting the future as it spoke to the nation of Israel. Before we begin class officially, although we just did barely, I have several boxes of, I never remember, Terry, sanitizer, hand sanitizer. And I have access starting tomorrow to over 50,000 boxes. Walmart is sending them to the warehouse that John operates for benevolent ministry. And I'm going to bring some out tonight and want you to take a box or at least a few bottles, this hand sanitizer from Walmart. And they're sending 2 25 to 30-foot trailers full of them tomorrow. And we're trying to get it out to schools, to health agencies, to anyone that could use them, nursing homes, just whomever. And we plan to head up there this week and fill up the van with just as many as we can get, encouraging people in the area, if they have access to a truck themselves, to contact John and make arrangements to go pick them up if they're wanting a good amount. But they're free. It's free. So help us get those hand sanitizer bottles out into the community for those who could use them, especially those who are buying them. It's something that we used way before COVID, but certainly in COVID, in this environment, we've used it a lot more. But help us do that. One approach to Romans chapter 11 would be to ask the question, does God keep His promises? He made a promise as He chose the nation of Israel, not because of their size, not because of their power, but because He loved them. It wasn't based on anything that they did or didn't do or anything about their size or power. He simply chose them out of love. But it has to be answered that for the most part, the nation of Israel, even to this day, has still not received the information and taken hold to the facts of Jesus Christ. Chapter 11 begins, I ask then, did God reject His people? And again, by no means. There's no God there. Some translations, God forbid. Theos isn't there. But it's a strong answer. By no means. God did not reject Israel. He says, I am an Israelite, myself a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. And Paul in Philippians goes to his heritage as Jew and who he studied under and what he knew and his zeal for the law and all of those things. So to answer, first of all, if you're suggesting that he's rejecting any Jewish person, and especially the nation of Israel, I stand Exhibit A. I'm Exhibit A. He did not reject Israel. Israel has rejected him. And of course that's implied, as we know the story of Saul, converted and then named Paul. So he rejected the idea of Christ for quite a while, but he realized and then converted and knew and ended up dying for the cause of Christ. So I'm Exhibit A, Paul said. But he says God did not reject His people whom He foreknew. There's that word again. Paul uses it a lot. Ephesians and in this book, God had the ability to look ahead and know that there would be a need for a Savior. And that need became known before the creation of the world. And it was revealed that those who accept Jesus Christ will be part of that spiritual kingdom. He knew ahead of time. It didn't force someone to make a decision for or against. It didn't force a nation to make a decision for or against, but it's Paul's way of saying again, this isn't a surprise. It's not a surprise that Israel has rejected Jesus as a whole. He knew, he foreknew that this would take place. And then he says, don't you know what the scripture says in the passage about Elijah? So he takes them back to a famous prophet, to a very well-known event to help them to see some things. How he appealed to God against Israel. Lord, they have killed your prophets and torn down your altars. I am the only one left, and they're trying to kill me. Now, he's quoting Elijah in the Old Testament from 1 Kings 19, when Elijah appealed to God because his life was in danger. And he reminds God, he didn't need the reminder, but he's reminding God that they've killed prophets. They've killed them before. I'm concerned for my life. And so he appeals to God against the nation of Israel. And what was God's answer to him? It's one of the powerful statements of the Old Testament in the story of Elijah. I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Elijah, it looks like nobody believes. You're in fear for your life. You're not seeing a belief around you. You're not comforted. You don't have confidence knowing that there are people who believe in God, who will follow God around you. But let me tell you this. There are 7,000 who've not bowed the knee to Baal. And Baal was one of the gods offered, one of the gods worshipped, built up during the ministry of Elijah. So what would that do for someone who's discouraged? Someone who's fearful for their life? Someone who's crying out to God in a lament about how Israel is killing prophets? What would that statement do? What was God's intent? Say it again. I missed the last part. Absolutely. You're not alone in this. You're not alone in this. Many years ago, I haven't done it since. It just hasn't come up to where it fit, if you will. Many years ago, we declared at congregation in Central Ohio Youth Month, and we would spend Sundays saying things and doing things toward our young people. And on that Sunday morning, I said, I want everyone to come in tonight, Sunday night. I want you to sit on one side of the auditorium. Now, I'm not crazy, but I need you to do it so I can make a point. And so they did. They all came in and sat down on one side of the auditorium. Congregation of about 170, and there's about 80 there, I suppose. And so they were all on one side of the auditorium. And after introducing some comments in the sermon, I sat down and kept talking with a portable mic, and I says, this must be how it feels like for the young people of this congregation when they go to the public school. They feel as if they're all alone. And I sat down and just had them for several minutes imagine what it would be like to be a Christian in many high schools and you feel like you're all alone. But I says, young people, you may feel like this, but you need to see this. See the 80 plus there with you, praying for you, concerned about you. You're not alone. And I was told later it really made the point that I wanted it to make to our young people. They're not alone. We're not alone. Now, would it help if God told us something to tell us how many Christians there are in Covington County? If we don't know that, or if we would need to know that to where we would have more confidence in who we are and the influence that Christ could have in this community? Ansel Jenkins preached many years at the Sunset Congregation in Miami. We would meet for lunch regularly between the two places, about a 30-minute drive. And he says, Gary, if all the unfaithful members of the Churches of Christ who are here in Dade and Broward County would come back to the church, worship regularly, all of our buildings would be full. Now, that was sad to hear. But he had been there 2 decades plus, and that's what he sensed. There's a lot of unfaithful members in Dade and Broward County. Now, that's not encouraging. If can be encouraging, if it would happen. But we're not alone, Elijah was told. You're not alone. There are 7,000 who've not bowed down to Baal. And what he doesn't say, but Elijah implied it, but I don't see these people. I don't know about these people. I'm not around these people. Maybe he was, and he was just deeply discouraged and maybe even depressed. But God said there's many others out there. And what was God's answer? And he says, so too, verse 5, at the present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. And if by grace, then it is no longer by works. If it were, grace would no longer be grace. They were chosen, this elect, chosen by the acceptance of Jesus Christ, but it wasn't based on what they did, not based on the law. And that's what he's dealing with through most of chapter 8, 9, 10, and now again in 11. This isn't by works. They haven't earned anything that would put God in their debt. If that was the case, there would be no need for grace. If I can earn my way to heaven, why would I need God's grace? Why would God's grace need to be here, available, if we could earn our way? The point is, we can't. We can't. We depend on God's grace, God's riches at Christ's expense. It's the acronym to make a different statement. Unmerited favor is the traditional definition that's given. A remnant. A remnant. Those of you who sow, what is a remnant? Leftover scraps that make great something. Some of you have great imaginations. To see that pile of leftover scraps from a mismanaged or misapplied or mismatched colors and stripes or whatever. And with a little imagination, it can be pulled together to make something to give to someone in need. I've seen that around my house. It's something that will always be left. Out of the whole, there will always be a smaller amount. And he's speaking of Christians, not just of Jews who have accepted Christ here. Whatever this world moves toward and whatever this country moves toward in coming decades, if we are allowed to move forward in coming decades, there will always be a remnant of God's people. Baptized believers, baptized in the right way for the right reason. There's a lot of people baptized by immersion, but it's not in order to have sins forgiven. They believe their sins were forgiven already. It's an outward act of an inward action. But baptism, we believe it's in order to have sins forgiven. Baptism is part of the process. And there will always be New Testament Christians. Because of the misuse of the word, I find myself feeling as if I need to say New Testament Christians, according to the New Testament pattern. And there will always be that. Can we take consolation in that? I hope so. Do we wish it were 10 million? Well, a remnant's not delegated to just a fraction of a number. There may be 10 million in a remnant worldwide at some point. But considering there's, 236 million in our world, in our country, and soon to be over 3 billion in our world, A few million's part of the remnant. So we can get concerned about numbers, but a remnant isn't delegated down to a handful. It's the smaller value of the whole. And there will always be a remnant. And don't we want to be part of that? Whatever happens, we should want to be part of that. Is it easier to go to the largest religious group in town compared to going to one that's a little bit smaller, but people kind of wonder about them? The book of Acts called a cult the Way. In some cases today, some of the names, how many of you, by the way, this came up in a conversation with someone else within the last month, how many of you have ever been called a Campbellite? You know, a lot of congregations don't have any clue to what that means. That means you haven't studied the Restoration Movement. Alexander Campbell. And in the years where many of us were born or about to be born, when somebody found out that we were members of a Church of Christ, oh, you're one of those Campbellites. Sometimes those who did not believe what we believe knew more about our history than some of us in the congregations knew. But Alexander Campbell was one of 6 or 7 who came from other countries, and he saw the need to restore the first principles of the New Testament, the Restoration Movement. And to be called a Campbellite was meant to be a demeaning thing when they said it then. Most of us, again, it's not known by the religious world. The Restoration Movement isn't in the forefront, apparently, of many religious groups and their teachings or their study of history of other religious groups. But a Campbellite, a Stonite, didn't catch on. That doesn't sound as sexy, I guess, from Barton W. Stone. Not a Stonite just didn't catch on, but a Campbellite, it caught on for a period of time. And it's a distinction for people to say you're one of those. You're a Campbellite. Sue?
I've always been, I've heard people tell me, I tell them, you know, member of the church, and they say, oh, y'all are the ones that believe you're the only ones going there.
Yeah.
Now, that's what I feel like.
Yeah. You know, I've only had 2 people suggest that in my life that were outside of fellowship. It's something we have been told or heard in our past. Who's going to heaven, by the way? Those who do the will of God. Is every member who claimed membership in a Church of Christ doing the will of God going to be saved? Absolutely not. Because there's a lot of people with the right name on the sign, but what they're doing on the inside is not pleasing to God. So that statement is so wrong in many ways, but there are many who may find confidence in having grown up in, quote, a Church of Christ congregation or something, but you've got to look to their life, you've got to look to their belief system, you've got to look to their Christian walk system. I'm going to do it right now. It's supposed to come later at the end of about 5 sermons on handling emotions God's way. I'm going to make a comment right now. May choose to go there a month. If at some point we could say that there's coming a day in our lifetime when everyone has the same belief system we have about women's role, baptism, communion every Sunday, don't use instrumental music, and make a list of baptism essential as part of salvation, 5 or 6 things that are earmarks of what we stand for and who we are based on the New Testament. Do we have anything else to do as Christians in this world? Yes, we do. We need to live Christian lives. And I think sometimes we accent some of the differences we have, which we should. And as I told someone as we were talking about his possible conversion recently, we aren't ashamed of these things. We believe they come from Scripture. We're not ashamed of these beliefs that we have. But if everyone came to believe all of that, is our work over? Not at all. We are expected to live Christ-like lives. And we need to be living Christ-like lives as we're also making comments, not arguing really, hopefully, but standing up for what we believe are New Testament principles, restoration principles, if you want to attach a movement to it. We need to be living like Christians. And that needs to be reminded of us often instead of necessarily spending too much of our time zeroed in on 4 or 5 pretty important issues. And I'm not making light of them, but being a Christian and living like a Christian is important. Whatever else is work. So, remnant. There's a remnant. Always there will be a remnant. A smaller number of the whole. Christ will never be without representation upon this earth by people who are part of the spiritual Israel, the phrase he used in chapter 9. The spiritual Israel. And that should be a good confidence builder for us. It should be a motivator for us to understand that it's not important that we're a part of the greater, not minimum, but maximum. What's the maximum? Where's the path of the maximum? The wide path. And many join the wide path. Where's it leading? To eternal damnation. Narrow the path, wide the path. I don't want to be with the majority. Neither do you. We should be part of the narrow path. But, of course, we have questions, and it took Paul 3 chapters to fully answer what went wrong with Israel. What then? Verse 7, the next statement that comes after he's answered that first question. What then? What Israel sought so earnestly it did not obtain, but the elect did. So the nation of Israel sought a right relationship with God. And they thought by observing the law, and in their mind, to the best of their ability, the Pharisees, even to a perfect extent, I've earned what God owes me. But he says Israel were earnest. Remember the first verses of chapter 10 last week, they had a zeal without knowledge. They had a zeal for God, but it wasn't based on knowledge, and it led them astray. But here he's saying what they sought, Israel did not obtain, but the elect did. And what has he just done? He's just differentiated between the concept of Israel and the elect. Israel is not part of the elect as far as the Jewish nation as a whole. The elect are those who have received a belief system around Jesus Christ. That's the elect. So he lays it out there and lets you see that these two are there and one has, as far as receiving what they have attained toward. The others were hardened. And there's that word again. It's on the bulletin again, some ideas to help us maybe look in the mirror and see if we are moving toward having a hard heart. It's not toward God. It's not toward a belief system in Christ. It might be a hard heart toward people. And you'll understand that after the sermon this morning. It's people. We may have developed a hard heart toward people who are around us. But the others were hardened, as it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes so that they could not see, ears that they could not hear, to this very day. Now remember what we said about Pharaoh and how God hardened his heart. If God has put someone, and let's use these words, if God has given someone a spirit of stupor, eyes can't see, ears can't hear, who's responsible for that? Is it something God just said, okay, boom, you cannot believe, no matter what you're taught, you cannot believe it, and even though you want to, I'm taking control. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that, remember in chapter 1, the relational, or the rational sinner rather, the rational sinner hears, knows, sees, he understands, it's clear from the creation, the eternal power and deity of God, he's decided, I will not believe. It's a willful unbeliever. He's had all the information, it's clear, there's probably others around him that have come to believe in that same time frame, hearing that same information, and I will not believe. And that's why God has caused, through trying to reach that person says it long enough, he cannot believe out of his choice. His calloused heart has become hardened. That stupor of unbelief is based on his refusal to take in what's been taught, to listen and believe what's around him, sometimes for decades. God never causes someone to head toward hell. He gives them all the opportunities in the world, but sometimes they make that willful choice, even with all the correct information. It's a rational sinner. He rationalizes there is no God, and I want nothing to do with him. It's a decision that's been made, and because of that, God allows him to be in that stubborn state, in that stubborn, obstinate state. Chapter 10 closed. All day long, I've held out my hands concerning Israel to a disobedient and obstinate people. Reaching out, as we closed class last week, reaching out is God's willingness and wanting them to come. But they didn't want to. They didn't choose to. And that's what could be said of them. And that's not my words, it's Isaiah's words in Isaiah 65, verse 2. David said this. He's looking at witnesses here. The witness of Paul, the witness of Elijah, the witness now of David. And David said, 11 verse 9, may their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block, and a retribution for them. May their eyes be darkened so they cannot see, and their backs be bent forever. Again, quoting from, let me look at my notes, Psalm 69, 22 and 23. So David saw it too. And it's by their willful choice that this could be said of them. It's their choices that would cause their table to become a snare and a trap, stumbling block, for their eyes to be darkened, their backs bent forever. Symbolism to burdened, troublesome life, difficult life, that type thing. Or do you have comments?
I would, like when you were in China, if you gave a talk like you have to us, how would it be received?
In our apartment, not with a background of Israel, and not with a deep background of multiple thoughts, but we studied with about 200 Chinese students in our 2.5 years there. And in our apartment, we could say anything we wanted. And we encouraged them to realize that there's a lot of people that don't believe the Bible's important. And we would talk in general terms because until we moved to Beijing, we didn't feel as if those freshman and sophomore students were really ready to even hear much about God in Christ. So we would spend time introducing them to God. And we studied Romans 1, verses 18 through 21. And we challenge them. Now, can you begin to look at the creation, and can you begin to be open to the possibility that this is from God? And if you believe that God created what you have here, can you then perhaps say you can be thankful and give Him praise? Because that's what the Scriptures ask for. And many of them would shake their heads, yes, we can see that. They would be able to receive that. When we moved to Beijing, instead of being 18 and 20-year-olds, they were 25 to 55-year-olds. And many of them had studied and heard about biblical things, and some of them baptized while we were there by the Chinese groups that could speak their language, and we would always encourage them to go to the New Testament house churches. You know what this means now? They were New Testament Christians meeting in Beijing, 15 to 20 strong, preaching, teaching, singing in Mandarin. But they would talk more forcefully to them because they were more mature in their understandings, and the people were older, having... There's one group that we spent less time in Jingzhou, and I told them the last time we met with them, you haven't been ready to hear the whole story yet. We haven't spent enough time. They just barely come past the willingness to consider a belief in God. But I want to tell you the whole story before we leave this week. And God came to earth, and Christ came and lived a life, and He was offered as a sacrifice for the sins of the people, us, and I very quickly gave them a summation. And I said, I hope you will keep studying so that you will be ready to receive that information fully and be ready to make a decision about Jesus Christ. But they had no background, and some of them we'd not spend that much time with. But we could not leave that city without saying some of those things to at least plant a seed and hope they would continue. We gave out about 6 boxes of Mandarin Bibles while we were there, and they were provided through a church in, I think, Texas, that would send the money, and missionaries, Christians who lived in the city, would be sure that if we let them know, they would bring them to us. And Wang did. Wang's a very common name in China, but Wang would bring us another box very quickly when we needed one. It's the idea of saying to people what they can receive when they're able to understand it. And that's the hard part sometimes. We felt good about sowing seed, and we know it will bring forth a harvest. And we heard from Wake yesterday. She's just been married, and she's in the middle of a pandemic again, where she lives in China, in Hubei province. But we'll hear from some of our students, and it's exciting. Did you have a comment, Jed? I thought out of my eye, I thought I saw a hand up. I didn't want to ignore it. Nobody's hand over here? Okay. Maybe I have a floater over there today. Other observations, we get into something pretty technical in the last half of the chapter. Taggart, and some of you, would probably be better to help me understand what we're about to hear. But it's the ability to engraft 2 into 1. We had a tangerine tree in South Florida in our backyard, and the person who had lived there years ago was really good, we were told, at grafting in things, and he grafted in a tangerine with an orange, and it turned out to be the most sour fruit you've ever eaten, with lots of seeds. So the branches weren't the best, apparently. But he's getting ready to talk about grafting in the Gentiles with the root, if you will, that was part of Israel, the early intentions and the grafting in. Again, another question, it's the third one of this chapter. Did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? The question better stated or stated differently, is there still hope? Is there still hope for a Jewish person? And is there still hope for a large number of those who are part of Israel today? Not at all. Not at all. They did not fall beyond recovery. There's always hope. To be sure we're seeing what's being said. It's asked in the negative and answered in the negative. But there's always hope. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. And he introduced that idea in chapter 10, verse 19. Again, I ask, did Israel not understand? First, Moses said, I will make you envious by those who are not a nation. I will make you angry by a nation that has no understanding. The children of Israel could not stand the Gentiles. They didn't see them as worthy. They didn't see them as capable of understanding. There was nothing about a Gentile that brought any favorable light to Israel. And then think of what would have happened when in Acts 10, Peter goes in, converts a household of Gentiles, and suddenly there's hundreds and then thousands of Gentile Christians. What do you think went through their mind? Well, I don't know. I don't have any clue. Except we go to Acts 15, and they were trying to figure out if these are Christians, and you're telling us they were baptized in the right way for the right reason, the Jewish Christians were having trouble going into a building or a home to worship with Gentile Christians. How can we worship with them? The Gentile part was overriding the fact that they were fellow Christians around the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So this was a major thing when you look at the New Testament. But because of their transgression, salvation came to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their fullness bring? Think about that for a second. If God came first and foremost to reach Israel through His Son, and He did with many, still is today, but because they went to the Gentiles and they had interest, having heard the teaching and believing, willing to die for the cause of Christ, and how great that is, think how greater it will be if those who were originally targeted by God from the beginning, the Israelites, the nation of Israel, how much greater will that be? And He wasn't suggesting that they would be more worthy or better Christians. Just think of that process and how much greater it would be if more of the Israelites would come to faith. If we see how great this is, think how much greater this would be if they would come to faith. So he, again, is putting the two there in the same picture. He said, I'm talking to you Gentiles, Gentile Christians at Rome. Inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I make much of my ministry, in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. And that's telling us how Paul used the idea of envy in hopes of saving some of them. How do you do that? Let's imagine that I'm a baseball coach, and I'm a good baseball coach, and that is an imagination. But I'm a good baseball coach, and I move into a community where I've never lived before, and I'm trying to develop a baseball league. And you develop an enthusiasm and an interest for a baseball league, perhaps sharing a story that you've been a part of. I just have to tell you about this team 3 years ago in so-and-so county. And we'd never had teams there, but they were willing to come out and work, and they were willing to work hard. And because they worked hard, they went. In the first 2 or 3 years, they didn't do that well, but they advanced in age and maturity, and eventually they won the 13 and under championship of our county. And there's a 10-year-old boy that's had a curiosity about baseball. He's wanted to try it, but hadn't. You tell somebody a successful story, and it creates within them a desire that was hidden. Well, I think I can. I think I will. Maybe that can be a story told of me in 3 years, of coming and working and whatever. That principle works when Paul says, I wanted to talk about the salvation of the Gentiles and the changed life and the new commitment and the willingness to die for a cause. Maybe to stir up within the heart of this stubborn, obstinate Jewish man or woman to where they will have a different attitude and a different willingness than they've had. That's what Paul's saying. Stir up among the Gentiles the stories, the excitement, who they are, what they have, where they're going, and it may create interest here where there hasn't been before. And it's a common circumstance. It's a common circumstance in our world and other areas of life to encourage people to maybe be willing to buy in. I wanted to arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. Now, what have we already heard from Paul? I wish that I could be accursed, cut off from Christ for my people. And chapter 10, my sincere desire and prayer to God for the Israelites is that they may be saved. Jewish man Paul, converted to Christianity, still cared about the children of Israel, the physical Israel, wanting them to be the spiritual Israel. And he made that distinction in chapter 9 for us. He still cared about his people, as he describes it here. Verse 15, for if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Think what it will be like if their rejection has led others to have an interest and to allow people like me to give them time because they aren't interested. Just think about what it would be like if they, Israel, would be reconciled. Think about what it would mean. Think about the impact it would have. So he's just seeing it from a realistic standpoint of possibilities. And I'm sure it was a motivation to keep him going forward. The 12 plus years we were in South Florida, I can tell you where two Jewish Christians sat regularly. They were usually in the back left-hand corner of the center aisle, pretty close to each other. One of them, younger, his family disowned him, and he was deeply devoted to mom and dad. And with time, they came to accept him back as son, though he was a Christian. The other one, I never really heard him talk about the rejection, if you will, of his family when he converted from Judaism. But he was there, he was faithful, his family were there. But we were blessed to know that it's possible. It's possible in South Florida, where probably a third of the population is Jewish in Broward County. Such a large Jewish community that they had to adopt a Jewish calendar decades ago for the school system. Because if they weren't out when the Jews were not allowed to go to school, they would lose hundreds and hundreds in each school as far as attendance. And you receive federal grants based on your attendance, your average daily attendance. So that's how the school gets state and federal money, based on the attendance So it's huge, huge population. And some of them are New Testament Christians. Some of them are New Testament Christians. And it's no small thing. Let's go to the hard part. Verse 16, if the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. So now he's transitioning to this engrafted branch. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, that's the Gentile, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not boast over those branches. If you do, consider this. You did not support the root, but the root supported you. You will say then, branches are broken off so that I could be grafted in. And granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief. And you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid. For God did not spare the natural branches. He did not spare you either. That's really a difficult section of talking about the grafting in of the Gentiles into the Jewish branch, root rather. But it's something they would have understood, because agriculture was probably more of the vogue of that place. We'll come back and finish chapter 11 next week.